Farming to Glory, a family chronicle by Fred D. Townsend Sr. Continued. Things were so different in those early days, and when my mother and father were in their late 50s. I remember when dad was hardly gray and mom, silky hair, had few white strands. They were strong and aggressive, and it seemed then that hardship was only a challenge to succeed. They were ardent churchgoers, dedicated Christians, and counselors in their own rights. Mama, more than all, demonstrated her spiritual conviction through her unflinching faith in God and her benevolence to the people in the district, especially the young. Her simple, loyal filled life affected all of us, but in particular, I came under most of her teachings in her later years, when the other children left and were still leaving home to parry for themselves. Papa managed his job at Flamstead until most of his offspring passed from juvenile to adulthood, and although their migration was gradual, the sudden realization that our big 5-bedroom boardhouse was almost empty did not take too kindly to their physical bearing. In fact, their aging frames could no longer resist the manifestation of exertion and fatigue. Even then, at about 58 and 60, respectively, Mom and Dad were still performing with vigor some of their daily chores. They were, however, assisted by me to some extent and my grandson Rudolph, whom they did adopt from birth. Conditions did not improve, however, but gradually deteriorated when I was sent off to high school in Kingston. Changing the guard. A new era had dawned. Rudolph alone in attendance at the big house. Things were changing even more rapidly than it appeared. Time accelerated and history was being made within a period of 4 long years or short years, depending on the vantage point of view. A total revamping of the old order and the bringing in of the new had begun. The old Flamstead Empire had disintegrated, and the government land lease program benefited from its fall. Mom and Dad were obviously exhausted and needed closer help and attention. Rudolph, becoming quite a young man, was himself seeking to migrate. After graduating from college, I entered the job market, and before the expiration of many years, I married my lovely wife Dorrit Dean, November 1955. Dorrit and I finally settled down in a beautiful little cottage at 26 Campbell Boulevard in the Malidens Gardens, and there we were able to celebrate the 50th wedding anniversary of dear Mama and Papa. My nephew, Rudolph, eventually succeeded in migrating from Queensville about that time and became successfully employed in Kingston. His younger brother, Stanley, succeeded in his place at Big House with grandparents. Since Mom and Dad were becoming more reliant on our physical attention and presence, our visits had to become more frequent and consistent. This new era brought to view the realizations of the mass immigration of our siblings and our relatives and other relatives, to many countries of the world. For instance, several became permanent residents in Great Britain and the Americas. The visits to our parents were greatly improved when a new house was acquired for them a mile from Papine and just a half mile from the University of the West Indies. Mom and Dad appeared revived when they came to Hall's Delight. This place was fresh and the plants and trees green. Papa especially worked hard on the land, bringing his farming experience to bear the virgin soil. The crops did flourish, but this was suburban Kingston, where predial larceny was rampant. They, however, made a great contribution to the area, and both passed away suddenly in rapid succession into glory. Papa always quoted Psalms 17:15. As for me, I will hold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake thy likeness. To Mama, I quote from Dr. James Dobson, Straight Talk to Men and Their Wives. A sudden death is God's kiss upon the soul. Chapter 2. Historically speaking. After emancipation, grandfather Alex Townsend was already about 90 years of age when I was born. He could have been even older because what Mr. Rosa, hey, I apologize. He could have been older because his unshaven beard was long and white. He carried a crutch stick to aid him along the steep terrains of Dallas Castle. In his early years, documentary records of birth and deaths were just being enforced in the rural communities. But Grandpa, for all that was what we call him, was born in the parish of Portland. Recording the births and deaths among the poor and peasant were very rare. When my parents had their first child, the register of births and deaths was performed at the local post offices. Mama and Papa had no such improved documentation except the old-fashioned records in the prescribed section of the Holy Bible. We were perhaps third generation after emancipation, and many changes had already begun in the turn of the 1930s. Many of my brothers and sisters had already become adults and left home. For instance, the first child, Francilla, got married, had her first son, Ernest, and went to live with her new family at Stones throw away. A second child, Christinella, went to trade school in Kingston, returned during my infancy, got married, and bore her first child, Rudolph, at the Big House. Charles, my parents' first son and third in line of succession, also left home before 1931 and early during my childhood. He in particular made many frequent returns because he never seemed to have been able to paddle his canoe. His disappointment with the stormy seas created a misty atmosphere with his siblings, and each of his homecoming became a choleric episode. Joshua, Brother Joe, Josiah, Brother Joe, was a champion as far as we were concerned. Just 2 years younger than Charles, he proved the needed protection against a pugnacious older brother. As nature would have it, Brother Joe was stocky and strong and proved to be more than a match for any form of tyranny. The Flamsteed Dynasty. Busher Townsend was very active in those days with the Flamsteed business. God provided, he said, big sons and daughters to help him in a variety of activities. Here was running of errands for the great house where the Bacras from England and America came to holiday and to play golf. The daily mail carrier service must be maintained between Gardentown and Flamsteed. The marketing, purchasing of grocery provisions and delivery of vegetables and flowers, mainly on foot between Gardentown, Papine and Kingston. In those days, We fail to comprehend the skill and efficiency displayed by our Father in managing those services so efficiently. The methods used in appropriating assignments to different persons and the interaction between them were amazing. Considering that Busher had only little education, baffled the intellectual minds of the rich and famous. During Grandpa Alexander's boyhood years, the British school system had just begun to emerge. In fact, it was less than 100 years after emancipation and the plantation was serving at home, school and church, especially in St. Thomas, Portland and Chelan. It was still the reign of the plantation and the freedom, or better, the opportunity to own land, to cultivate crops with red wattle and dove houses or boarded structures were considered incomparable achievements and had to be given priority over proper reading and arithmetic. New type of leadership. My brother Martin, who became Director of Correctional Services in the late 1970s, once said, "Thank God those backward days did not last forever." I might hesitantly contend that those were perhaps not completely backward days. In the true sense of the word, after seriously surveying the long trip, the proverbial Tipperary, those long time days may have been formidable for foundation building. We all reap bountifully from their fruits and observe parallel descriptions in Psalms 127 verse 1. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Martin followed Josiah in the line of succession, and he brought about a total different modus operandi. Josiah died at the age of 22 years, a veritable young giant. He was admired and respected by friends and foes, in which he had many. He was dearly loved by his kin and kith and kin. A measure of caution must be applied here. The Thousand Chronicle had been balanced by nativity. The feminine side must not be understood. The sisters' profile: Leonis, Gwen, and Ina were the big sisters remaining in the big house. Leonis was expert at cooking and loved farming and selling of farm products. Gwen was very calm and domestic, preferring only to be with Mama, sewing and darning whenever the opportunity arose. Emma was more of a tomboy. She preferred outdoor activities and was an expert at climbing tall trees, mango trees in particular. The last sister down the line of girls was Belinda, the crying doll. She was very much detached from the other girls as two boys. Alexander and Ivan, in that order, were born in between after Ina. So Linda, as she was called, could hardly find a playmate among the senior young ladies due to perhaps her rampant Pride and Prejudice quotation. But Next paragraph. Next section. And the brothers, Ernest and Rodolphe, you will remember, were the two first offsprings of the sibling girls. They never left big house after their births, but grew up as children of mom and dad to the extent that it took us several years to discover that they were nephews and not brothers, as if that would make any difference. Alexander, Alex for short, and Ivan grew up as twins. Although they were 1.5 years apart, they were slightly different in patterns of behavior, but their values and goals were similar. Later, in the following chapters, an honest and unbiased attempt will be made to describe their profiles. It was certain, however, that the empire at Queenshill had been well established. It grew stronger and stronger with Big Papa steering the wheel with inevitable accuracy. After all, with so many hands, hardly anything could go wrong. So it seemed. The years passed and in rapid succession, the children were growing fast into adulthood and the rural village, even the most inaccessible, were opening to urban influences. New ideas and new desires penetrated the hearts of the young everywhere, and the Thomas the Clan became incensed also with ambitions. I'm ambitious, I'm not ambitious. Opportunities were being exposed to every nook and cranny of the village. The demands for teachers, nurses, security personnel, agricultural and health workers were advertised and published in the local papers. End of chapter. Chapter 3, Help and Alliance. Farming to Glory, Jamaican Chronicle, Fred D. Townsend Sr. A matter of choice. The early periods covered in the chapters were during the last of the colonial days. Jamaica was still in the grip of the British monarch, and most of the socio-economic benefits were rare and special. We still remember the beginning of the World War II around 1945 and the opening of farm worker programs in the USA. These were themselves changed the whole outlook of the Jamaican rural society. Peasant farmers and cultivators began taking a serious look at education. Children were encouraged to improve their attendance in primary schools. They began taking their lessons to heart. Many passed examinations, set in both local and overseas syndicates, and entered teachers' college, nursing, medical, law school, and the civil service jobs. The hierarchical bureaucracy at Flamstead and Empire at Queenshill eventually started to crumble. Many of the grown-ups had already left home for Kingston and were employed as nurses and cooks, artisans and professionals. It was during her sojourn that Mother Gwen met a Christian family headed by Carl Richard, a noted evangelist who led her to Christ. Soon afterwards, she married Zedekiah Lee, a tailor and Sunday school teacher at Bethany Gospel Hall in Kingston. Martin was the leading brother at the time. The demise of Brother Joe meant that there were no more muscular force to moderate the excess of Charles. Tactfulness, skill and diplomacy will have to be brought into play. It was where Martin passed the test in a true successor with his two able assistants, Alex and Ivan. They did their job well, but were quite unaware that they were being prepared for bigger responsibilities. As far as can be remembered, Ernest and Rodolphe stood laugh most of the time, and were never drawn too closely in any counter or conflict. They never failed, however, to be attentive to their grandparents, who never displayed any indifference or favoritism in their total love for all of us. Ernest left home in late 1940s to become apprentice tailor to Zedekiah Lee. He later joined the army and went overseas. Rodolphe remained faithful until the end, and I mentioned before that was the last relic to leave the boat. This he achieved in the later part of the 50s. In 1946, Martin joined the Jamaican Infantry Volunteer, which later became the Jamaican Battalion. He missed being sent into active combat during the war. The ship actually reached beyond Port Royal Point, heading for bigger seas, when a change in command altered the fleet's direction. I remember the jubilation of loved ones, saw sons, brothers, husband and friends returning and disembarking in the Royal Mail Wharf in Kingston. After the war ended, Martin was sent to military school in England and excelled in his study. He was immediately promoted on his return. We may have read about the timely building of the British Empire, but here we saw the rapid crumbling of our formidable domain. Alex must assume leadership. That was a role in which he had little interest, and before he could even have given it test, he went off to a farm in Connecticut, United States. By this time, Linda had already left home for Kingston to babysit for her older sister Gwen and to study. Next section, an indigenous captain. Remaining at home in Queens Hill were Ivan, Rodolphe and myself. Dear mom and dad were then showing physical signs of distress and anxiety. They were glad that their children were progressing and launching out on their own in the world. But they were missing them too badly. They were always wondering what the next move would have been. One could have detected the disquietness in the air and in their hearts. This was the time when they were going to need us most. The return of events were too much. Other untimely and heart-rending occurrence were yet to come. Things were in a way reshaping themselves, although not in the same customary routine, but a new and accepted order appeared to have been taking shape. Ivan was at the helm, an indigenous young man. Senior to me by 4 years. He had a natural flair of intelligence and improved on it by insisting that he attended school even at the expense of his father's errands. Ivan was able to ride above the troubled waters, if that's an appropriate expression. He managed his chores apparently well, but hardly sacrificing anything to add to his personal goal, whatever that was. Stop right, so. Farming to Glory, Jamaican Chronicle by Fred D. Townsend Sr.